Hello and welcome to this week's Halloween-themed episode of Movie Magpies. I am your camp counselor, as always, here at Camp Crystal Lake, Will. And with me is a possessed Furby from the year 2002, Monique. Anyway, we're talking about Beetlejuice. Let's get straight into it. Oh, that'd be funny, honestly.
I'm a Furby. No, honestly, small, slightly possessed, a little unhinged. It works.
For those who listened to last week's episode, that's for you.
That was a little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Mwah.
But yeah, we're talking about Beetlejuice, warning for suicide humor, because that's one of the most prominent things that we noticed. And also just warning for depictions of death, because it's a film about ghosts, people.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk or thought into death and what happens after you die.
Yeah.
So if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe sit this one out.
Yeah, but of course, spoiler warning, because we're going to just talk fully about this film. If you haven't seen the film but you're happy for it to be spoiled, Monique, what is the summary for what this film is?
Because a summary is such a spoiler.
That's a good start, though.
The Netflix summary is a young couple who drowned return to their house as ghosts, but must enlist the help of a goofy ghost to put a scare in the rude new owners.
Yeah, pretty bog standard kind of summary, really.
Yeah, misses the heart of the film, but gets the general gist down, which I suppose you want people to watch the movie to get the heart of the film,
Yeah.
so it makes sense.
And I think for a film that came out in 1988, a lot of people are either watching this film, they love this film, or they're going to be introduced to this film at some point in time. I think watching Beetlejuice is inevitable.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people may not have seen it yet. That's okay. Watch it. It's really fucking good. Watch it around Halloween. It's even better. There's no debate really as to whether or not we enjoy it. I think we both really enjoy it.
Exactly, and it's iconic. Like, the black and white thick stripes with lime green on it, that itself is a very iconic thing that has been linked to Beetlejuice forever. So, if you haven't watched this, I'd be incredibly surprised, actually.
Yeah, it's an incredibly recognizable trait. But you had a question. I remember you asking about just straight up the name.
I was going to ask that question. So, obviously, Beetlejuice is the way that it's spelt on the cover, but it's spelt more like Beetlegoose on everything inside the film. Why is that?
So, yeah, I do have the answer to that. I remember telling you that I had the answer to that, but also not telling you what it is.
Yeah, because I said, no, leave it for the podcast, William. It's content.
Yeah. So, basically, the poster and cover art of the film being written as Beetlejuice, as in beetle and juice, the orange juice and the small insect, came about because originally the film publishers believed that people wouldn't understand how to read that. More specifically, Americans would not be able to understand what that word read. They would probably say Beetleguys, as joked in the film.
Mm-hmm.
It was changed to Beetlejuice on the cover to alleviate that. Some people know what Betelgeuse is. Betelgeuse is Beetlejuice, but it is based on the star, the sun.
Star?
Yeah, in our solar system there is a star known as Betelgeuse.
Oh!
It is, I think, 20 times bigger than our sun.
That's a pretty dang big star.
Yeah, but you don't come here for astronomy, you come here for film.
I come here for both.
Yes. Well, anyway, so that's why they changed it on the front cover. It's pretty much the same kind of thing as the Sorcerer's Stone and the Philosopher's Stone for Harry Potter, where it was changed to Sorcerer's Stone because American publishers did not believe that Americans would know what a philosopher was.
Okay, so it's more a legibility thing than anything.
Yeah, and what a way to dunk on an entire country, really.
God, could you imagine being the country that made the entire title of the film change the spelling just because they thought you wouldn't get it? That's rough, buddy.
That is pretty rough. Anyway, now that we know that, let's get into the more meat of the film. So, we should probably start with characters, talk more specifically about each character, and...
yeah, we had a bit of a chat in our review about the characters. But really, I wanted to get more of a distinct first thoughts that you had of the characters, really about their opening scenes and how it conveyed them as a character from the get-go.
I think that's a really good idea. Well, I think the first two characters that we see on screen are Barbara and Alex. Alex?
Mm-hmm.
Adam. Barbara
Adam.
and Adam, the Maitlands.
I don't know why I just went along with that. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, Alex sounds good.
Yeah, and for them, I think they are very easily endearing. They're two characters who don't necessarily like to get out much. They're two characters who I think everyone can kind of maybe relate to, maybe less so these days, because I think we all want to not be at home quite as often anymore, but they're two... Oh, right, yeah. But two characters who are very happy within their own little world, and I think that makes them immediately likable. They're two characters who aren't necessarily antisocial, that's for sure, but they are comfortable within their lives.
And it really is picturesque in a way, the way that they are introduced. They're setting up for a vacation in this house that they seem to have just bought. They're more than happy that it's a house that doesn't get a lot of visitors.
Yeah.
They have to go down to the hardware store, and the lad, the barber that's sitting outside of his barber shop, starts trying to talk to Adam as he runs into the hardware store.
Yeah.
And Adam just full on, oh yeah, how you doing? That's good. Walks away from him, gets what
Yeah.
he needs to, and then comes back out and goes, I've got to go. Nice talking to you. And it's just so...
What I like about that scene is
comfortable?
it gives the impression that they've been in this area for a while, that they're comfortable even with the people in the town, but to a point where they're not necessarily sick of them, but they're so used to them that they know how to avoid them.
Yeah, so used to them that they know how not to get wrapped up in something that'll take them forever to get away from.
Yeah.
Which is really speaks to me on a deep level as someone who hates small talk.
I think they're so aware of the small workings of the town and the inner workings of the town that they have gotten past the formality of politeness with many of the residents of the town.
It's almost like the residents of the town see them as the quaint, polite little couple that lives up the hill, and they no longer have to actually be quaint and polite. They just have to smile and wave, and everybody's like, oh, it's just them being cute, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, they do come across as very likable and a sweet couple. I think they work incredibly well together. They appear almost perfectly as two parts of a whole, and not saying that either one of them is less than a whole person. I think they're two whole people that make a whole collective couple, and I think
they
that is really
complement
nice to watch.
each other incredibly well.
Yeah.
And it's very, very refreshing, especially, I think I said this in the review as well, in that sort of times of the 70s and 80s where a lot of couples were played up for laughs as, oh, I hate my husband, he never does anything, oh, I hate my wife, she got less and less pretty the second that I married her, to this cute little quaint couple that is just so wrapped up in each other that they could care less about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's really, really refreshing and lovely to see, and it endears you to them straight away because you feel wrapped up in their little corner of joy that they've made for themselves as the film starts.
It does really epitomize and then go beyond the term "till death do us part," honestly, because these two are married and then they continue to be with each other and stay with each other even after the trauma of dying.
Yeah, and it's that sort of vibe of, oh, I could stay with you forever in this little house, and then that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Which, they're just so cute.
Yeah, it's completely believable that they would actually be a married couple, and of course I said this in the review, but Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin play an incredible part in this because they have just such good chemistry with each other and working with each other to make this so believable and so likable, in that you like both individuals and then you like them as a couple too.
They wouldn't be so good as a couple if they didn't have such good chemistry, and that really is up to the actors. You can write that a couple is in love so much as you want in the script, but if the actors don't have good chemistry, it's just not going to read. So it really truly is a wonderful performance by our two actors.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what happened there. I tried to get fancy.
And but then we get to the point after death, and their relationship still remains quite consistent in that they're constantly looking out for each other, and it lends to this presence that for them, death was just another chapter in their marriage. And
Exactly.
then dealing with what comes after it is just another aspect of their marriage, and they continue, and with the idea that they both are comfortable living in this house alone and away from everyone, the idea of just being stuck in the house doesn't come across as a fate worse than death or hell for them. It actually is quite appealing to them.
I think Barbara even mentions they're like, oh, stuck in the house for all eternity. And Barbara's like, it wouldn't be so bad if the vacuum cleaner wasn't in the garage.
Yeah.
Because they can't go to the garage because it technically counts as outside the house. And it really just epitomizes how they would just stay forever in their little house, in their own little corner, even though they're dead, but there's dust everywhere and that's annoying. Like,
yeah, absolutely. It's like in life their worries were so small, and even in death their worries are still so small. And of course they are made bigger by the presence of a new family coming into their home and moving in. But for them, I think they handle adversity so well together that because of that, their worries are that small, that there's dust around the house and things like that.
Exactly. And it's that sort of thing of, alright, we're dead, but at least we're still together.
Yeah.
God, I wish I could clean the house. And it's just so wholesome, and it really helps push that theming of this movie being quite lighthearted, even though the subject is quite dark. It really does help that they're just such a unit that they're like, alright, we're dead, but we're still a couple, and we're still going to act like a couple. I think really even there's only, one or two times in the entire film that they're not together, and that is initially when one of them tries to walk outside the house and it doesn't go well, and when Ortho gets a hold of the Book of the Dead, or Book of the Recently Deceased.
Pretty much when they're separated at the end.
Yeah, and summons one of them before he summons the other one. It's never of choice, really.
Yeah, they never outwardly go out of their way to be apart, and I do find that really wholesome.
Yeah, and when they were going out of their way to be apart in the very start, it's because he's like, oh, I'm just going to look outside and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And he steps outside and ends up in the, like, big worm area. But
yeah, the sandworm.
Oh,
well, I think Beetlejuice says that it's Jupiter.
Really?
Yeah, he says the sandworms are... Well, I think it may have even been a news article in one of the papers that it's sandworms of Jupiter, but...
Oh, yeah, it's on the newspaper that he's reading when we first meet him.
But yeah, I find that a really interesting, and also lends really good credence to the fact that the film just never takes itself seriously, in that there are sandworms on Jupiter, and that's where ghosts go to when they leave their place of haunting, which I find very strange, but also really funny. And a bit of fun. It's
very funny. It's very zany. It's very out of left field. Incredibly not what you're expecting, which really, really works for this film. This film is definitely, and it's a horror movie, so this is what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Well, technically, but, like, you never really, unless you've seen the film multiple times and are incredibly obsessed with it, like I am, you're never really aware of what's going to happen next, because... It's just not taking itself too seriously. It doesn't feel like it has to hit the beats of a ghost movie. It's just like, they're ghosts. They're having fun, zany times.
Yeah, it's very wacky and out there, and as a result just is so easy to watch. But with the couple thoroughly analysed, maybe we should move on...
Talked to death.
Yeah, talk to death. Maybe we should talk about Beetlejuice.
A Beetlegoose?
Yeah, him.
He's very iconic. I think everybody at least a little bit knows his black and white striped suit, like I said at the start, and his weirdly lime green hair. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's almost something that's used in themes, whether it be a drawing theme or a theme for like a journal, or everybody always seems to rotate back to Beetlejuice in some way during Halloween. He's just, oh, look at me, I'm wearing a black pinstripe suit and my hair is green. Must be Beetlejuice. Like, it's such a lovely, iconic visual. And I think that is part to the costuming.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that it's probably really comfortable to wear as well. Because it looks like a comfortable suit, honestly.
Yeah, it's not a stiff suit. It seems almost... stretchy in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. But as we're talking about Beetlejuice, I think it's probably really good to start with just when we first see him, and I think that it's in an ad, isn't it?
It's not in an ad, so the first time. Oh, when we see him
Yeah,
proper?
see him proper. Yeah, yeah.
Right, okay, I thought you were going to say when his first appearance on screen,
Yeah,
which we don't actually see him, we just see the newspaper with the Jupiter worms on it.
yeah,
But
it's like a paperclip ad.
yeah, and it's really sets you off right for how he works as a character.
Yeah.
That he's self-aware almost in the film.
Yeah, but
That
he also presents himself in a way, because there is this really the overarching themes of the world of the dead is that it's almost a bureaucratic kind of red tape filled office life after death.
Mm-hmm.
And Beetlejuice is just a subcontractor in this world, and that's why he appears in newspaper ads and is trying to advertise himself. He's like a I don't want to say private detective, but that's the same kind of
Vibe that you're getting?
Yeah, but he's like a freelance subcontractor for people, where they, if people don't want to pay or can't pay full price for certain things, then they go to the newspaper and find someone for cheaper. Back then.
Yeah, exactly.
And I find Beetlejuice is very much this kind of guy where you know and expect that corners are going to be cut, and that maybe not everything's going to be up to code or up to the rules, but it'll get done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's you want these people out of your house? Awesome. I'll get them out of my house. No violence? Sorry, didn't hear that. Like, definitely I will help you with your issue, and I will get it done quicker than the bureaucrats could.
Yeah,
but it's not going to be pretty. It's definitely going to be a bit of a botch job.
You may not like it, and the end result may not be better necessarily, but you'll get what you want. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that really gives Beetlejuice a very interesting amount of depth within the film, in that he also indicates that he's been alive for a very long time, but you can never really pin down how long he's been alive or when he died, necessarily, and it adds to this mystery about him that is more throwaway, but really gives his character a bit of zest that is just really delightful to watch on screen.
Yeah, he's not just an enigma, he's an incredibly ridiculous enigma in the fact that he's a roadblock and a menace to both the antagonists and the protagonists in the movie.
Yeah.
Which really makes you go, who even is this guy? Where did he come from? And he's like, oh, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, type of thing.
Yeah.
But he's also so modern. A lot of his references and a lot of the jokes that he makes that are more self-aware are modern, and so it feels like he's incredibly adaptable, because he's like a little cockroach. He has to be adaptable to survive.
And as a counter to that, a positive counter to that, or I guess a good, not contrast, but to that, is that the things that are so consistent about him are pretty timeless as well.
Mm-hmm.
In that he's a sleaze, and he'll always be a sleaze, and that's a pretty timeless concept across it. But he's also he's kind of a sleazy dealer and salesman, basically. But all of that stuff can be translated back thousands of years, hundreds of years, and then to this very day. And that's what makes his character so, not endearing, but definitely likable. I think you don't necessarily hate Beetlejuice as a character, and I think it's because he remains both universal and then also adaptable.
He makes you uncomfortable at times,
sure.
But you're always so enraptured by him. He's never grating. He's never frustrating. It's just like,
he's not a character you hate.
What the heck is he doing now, He's almost like, you just can't look away. He's just so intriguing. Like, he's so weird, and he's a little creepy. He's very sleazy. He makes you a little uncomfortable, but you're still like,
but he's also quite goofy.
What is his deal? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, of course, Michael Keaton does that so well, and he plays his character so well, to a point where you are almost certain that you believe that Michael Keaton must have had a great time playing this character.
Gosh, he must have had so much fun.
Oh yeah, and it translates perfectly onto screen, where he's just this character who's dancing about being an idiot, being a sleaze, being a salesman, but he's still really fun to watch. And he's never not fun to watch.
No, he's always the biggest and brightest part of a scene. If he's in the scene, he is the main focus of the scene.
Yeah.
He really does just take up the space and make it his own. And that is, of course, because the character himself is like, hey, look at me, I'm good at what I do. You should hire me. Oh, look, over here, flashy. But it's also just, in general, such a charismatic... I know we just said that he's sleazy and uncomfortable
but there is still a charisma
he's still
there,
so
for sure.
charismatic. Like, he just takes up space and you can't do anything but pay attention to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that what makes him so interesting as well is that he is not avoidant of consequences like most antagonists would be, in that they aim to avoid risk or the consequences of their own actions as much as possible. Beetlejuice doesn't care about the consequences and will take them on, as can be seen with the very end of this film, where to better his own gain, he steals the... what are they called? The checking tag at the ghost, office.
Oh,
yeah, I'm talking
the,
right at the end. Yeah.
number slip.
Yeah, the number
and
slip.
And his is 1 million, and he sees the guy next to him is 4, so he switches them around.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really care that his head gets shrunk.
Yeah,
he just
exactly.
wants to go first.
And it's such a interesting and fun addition to his character that he doesn't care about the consequences. He gets his head shrunk, and then he's like, oh, this is actually a pretty good look for me. And
I suppose
and you assume
that
he
almost
just keeps going with his life.
Helps lean into the fact that he is in fact undead in a way.
Yeah.
I suppose he doesn't look dead in the same way that the other characters look dead either.
No.
He looks almost undead because he's got the dirty sort of
he
almost
looks like he's rotting away, basically.
Won't come off him, and he's sort of rotting a little bit.
Yeah.
And it is a bit grody. It's very
absolutely.
grody, actually. But it really works for his character, and I think the fact that he doesn't care about the consequences really leans into this, and his visuals lean into it of I've been dead ages, what are they going to do to me, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And he's been dead so long he hasn't been exorcised, which for this film is a fate worse than death, or the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen to a ghost is they get exorcised and then they're stuck in a space of exorcism, which is just nothingness.
It's pretty much just death for ghosts.
Death for ghosts, yeah. And that I also find really nice is that they set up a ultimate consequence for the characters, and there is still a believable consequence for them. It's not like if they fail at what they're doing, nothing's going to happen necessarily, or they don't reap the benefits of their efforts. There is actually a genuine consequence that could be met by any of the ghost characters in this film. And I really like that because it actually adds stakes to the film while still maintaining that the film is a fun addition and, a fun thing to watch all the way through. It
helps because it means that as you don't get bored because you can't lean back on, well, they're dead, what's going to happen to them? But it's also not so much of a threat until Ortho uses that summoning ritual in the movie that you are constantly worried that it's going to happen.
But with the mention of Ortho, I think we should jump onto him quickly and talk about him, because
he is such an interesting character.
Yeah, I think he's a weird idiot, and I like that.
He is the most likable of the unlikable characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because he's got such a personality to him, and he doesn't really, until the end when he takes the book for the recently deceased, he doesn't really play that big of a role in the antagonism.
No. Yeah, he has very little value to the consequences of the film until he gets the Book of the Dead.
At which point he suddenly knows everything about ghosts. And, of course, because he just read a book on the recently deceased.
Yeah.
And he immediately uses it for his own gain, and it has horrible, horrible consequences.
Then I think it's still a believable depiction of a character who is clearly not necessarily the brightest, but also we've been given evidence that this book is not very clearly defined or clearly written out. It's written in a way that you would write a 1980s computer manual, and so
Yeah.
it comes across as confusing and dense, and as a result, though he's not necessarily stupid, it makes Ortho seem dumber.
Yeah, because he reads it and he starts this ritual and then
Yeah.
goes, I don't know how to finish it. Like, that wasn't a part of this chapter. Which is, in fact, really interesting to me because it's something that happened to our couple as well, to Barbara and Adam,
Yeah.
where. It is Adam, right?
Yes it is.
Okay, cool. To Barbara
You are
and
correct.
Adam, where they go to get help in the underworld and they take their ticket and they realize they didn't bring the book with them. And
Yeah.
one of the first things that their caseworker asks them is, did you even read through the whole book before you asked for help? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, no, it was confusing. We didn't know what was going on, so we came here for help. And Ortho almost does the same thing. He just reads the parts that he thinks is relevant to him,
Yeah.
or we assume so. We never actually see him reading the book, but he knows how to do the ritual, but not how to stop it. So you
Yeah.
assume he only read the bits that were relevant to him, and in turn comes off looking like a bit of a fool because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like that in that no character is necessarily stupid in this film, but with given context that we are provided with, you see them at their least ideal.
Yeah,
And-
you see them make some of their worst decisions
Yeah,
in this
absolutely.
movie in the context of the film,
Yeah.
which is good that they don't just do that for the antagonists like Ortho, they also do it for the couple and
Yeah.
for Lydia.
Characters make mistakes, they have consequences in this film, and the consequences have weight, but not to a point where people suffer untoward or unnecessarily. And I think that's really good because in real life you'll suffer consequences that don't necessarily ruin your life, but will make things a little annoying for a while. And I think I like that a lot. And
Yeah.
especially in a film that doesn't take itself so seriously is great.
Exactly, not everything or every choice that you make or every mistake that you make is going to completely rewrite the path you're taking in life.
Yeah.
But it may stop you in your tracks for a little bit. It may delay progress.
Yeah, and I think we can jump across to the Dietzes, so we'll talk about them as a collective too, because they're an interesting dichotomy to the Maitlands, as they kind of seem like a couple who are together, but more ideally viewed as separates.
They're together because it feels like they're together because it was fiscally appealing
Yeah.
rather than because they're actually romantically involved.
Yeah.
For instance, something that what's the dad's name? Charles Dietz does is he comes to this place and he's like, oh, we're out in a quaint little town. I love it here. This is going to be so relaxing. And he almost over pushes that he's so relaxed.
He's
because
so
he thinks that
yeah,
he's
he's
supposed
almost
to be.
so like by the book. Yes, I'm going to enjoy this, and this is how I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to follow all the stereotypical ways to enjoy being out in the country and not doing anything. And as a result, he seems almost like a store mannequin that's been given life, and then
Or almost like
and
he's
handbook on how to
trying
live.
to push that he's relaxed when he's
Yeah.
actually not.
Yeah,
And I feel
absolutely.
like that's also how these two approach their marriage is, oh, we're together and we love each other and it's great, but they're mostly together because she's a pretty well-known sculptor, or
Yeah.
well-known-ish. We never really get to know the scope of that outside of the movie.
Relatively famous.
And he is a rich businessman, so it just seemed right that they would get together.
Yeah, and as a result, neither one of them has a improved standing in their relationship. Outside of it, sure, they're two people, but within it, they're kind of just two people that kind of seem to tolerate each other.
Yeah.
And Delia definitely is a character who wants to take up the spotlight and be the most seen and strives for the most attention, but what I find really interesting is she's a character who is very clearly not liked or well appreciated by anyone in her life.
Even when she's in a group of socialites that seem to be
Yeah.
her friends, she says, these are my friends, don't embarrass me in front of these people.
Yeah.
Her
they
friends are
seem-
much more interested in what her stepdaughter has to say
Yeah.
than anything that she's saying. She makes a couple jokes and laughs, and the room goes dead silent. It's almost like no one really truly likes her, and only
Yeah.
friends with her because her husband's rich and she has sway.
She has sway and she's kind of famous, and as a result, they're kind of hangers-on for her.
Yeah.
But in a way that they almost still only just tolerate her, and that's a quite depressing kind of depiction of friendships in this world, in that they're only kind of hanging around with her for her notoriety or renown and her husband's wealth. But even then, they're just like, oh god, this woman, and she kind of appears as more of a happiness sponge than anything else, and that's really...
She's definitely more of a time sink, something that they
Yeah.
feel is a chore, something that they have to maintain, than something that they, like a friend that you want to
Yeah.
go and see.
And it would
And
be really quite depressing in a film that took itself more seriously. And it's great that it's in a film that doesn't, because it comes across as funny and it's done in such a humorous way that you don't end up feeling sorry for her or feeling pity, or that she's a pitiable, sad kind of individual. You kind of are just like, oh yeah, she's annoying as fuck, but it's also kind of funny. And then of course she does have a change at the end where both families do come together and they're more cooperative with each other, and you would assume that she has this growth, that she doesn't end up being quite as irritating as a person in the end, which is nice, because
she almost, instead of making sculptures and being like, my sculptures are the be-all end-all, she almost starts seeing herself as more of an artist. Like, she almost leans more into the art side of it than the I'm famous and my sculptures are famous side of it, which is really interesting to see, because at the end she's actually making what looks to be an unpainted version of the snake head that they use for when
the
Beetlejuice turned into a snake.
Yeah.
And she shows it to the husband and goes, what do you think of this one? And he sort of like screams and like faints, and she goes, he likes it, and then continues working. So it's not like everybody's opinion isn't the be all end all anymore for her, is sort of the vibe that you get.
Yeah, and you could probably chalk it up to trauma on his side, because Beetlejuice did almost kill him.
Yeah.
And but I think it's also a perfect
Also, he wasn't expecting to have a giant scary face shoved in it.
No, of course not. I think we can talk about Lydia at this point, because I think she for me was definitely one of my favourite characters, because one, she's played by Winona Ryder, which is easy to make her a favourite because she's great, but also she's such an enjoyable character who kind of bridges the gap between the living and the dead couples, and then the story becomes more about bridging between the living and the dead, between these two couples, through the medium of Lydia, a girl who can see the dead and can also communicate with the dead. And it's great. I really like it. And I really like her because she's doomy and gloomy, but then also very much still a whole person as well. She's not just a goth kind of stereotype with nothing beyond that two-dimensional part.
No, she really truly is her own character, and in her own right. They don't just use her as, oh, she's the dark and gloomy teenager, so of course she's the link between worlds. They really truly flesh out the fact that yes, she's dark and gloomy, but she is also kind and really warms up to these ghosts in a way that you're not expecting. Most people would be like, oh, ghosts, and they'd either be like, oh, this place is haunted and we have to do a seance, or they'd run screaming, whereas she's more like, oh, you guys just look like a normal couple, are you okay, what happened? Which really helps make her a person in her own right.
It really does humanize her, and I think the writing does a really good job of that, for sure. But with that said, the writing of these characters is so incredibly well done that characters feel believable, and they're given enough depth for them to stand alone as three-dimensional characters. Even side characters have that three-dimensionality to it. But with that said, we should probably talk a little bit more about the intentional design of this film. So,
I actually wanted to ask you, on intentional design, or just through lines in this film, you mentioned the rule of 3 being in this film.
Rule of 3. Yeah, so the rule of 3 is basically... So in filmmaking, the rule of 3 is a term used for film aspects or storyline aspects that are introduced. If they are important, they will be brought up 3 times within the film. and that gives the audience enough time to recognize that this is an important thing, and then going forward see it as either a Chekhov's gun or see it as a story foundation, or even as a teaching within the film that will be brought up in the end or will become the basis of the entire film.
Almost a little foreshadowing in a way.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but...
Yeah. In this film, however, the rule of three that I'm actually talking about is a little different, in that in the spirit world they always go in threes, or do things in threes. So Beetlejuice, third his name.
Goose.
Goose, yeah. And a lot of the spirit world stuff is operated on a rule of three, where it has to be repeated 3 times. And I just found that really interesting, because in filmmaking that's also a rule, but I don't think they're necessarily linked, but I want to be hopeful and think that they maybe are, because that would be quite cool.
Well, everything else in this movie is so intentional, so you feel like that would be a pretty intentional link of the rule of three. I do know the rule of three also comes up a lot in supernatural happenstances.
Yeah, I think it has
a
supernatural meaning to it.
So it might just be a nice little Easter egg that it is also a film rule, but it's super interesting to see how they brought that up. And obviously we're all very, very aware of Beetlejuice, Goose.
Yeah.
But like, what else are you gonna do? Like, it's so iconic now that everything is done in threes.
But with the rule of three, it does actually bring up a really good point, that so much of this film is painstakingly designed in a way that makes the film so well put together. The set design we've talked about in the review is incredible. The costume design, the makeup, all that stuff is really incredibly well done. But there is so much in this film that lends to the idea that so much more thought and painstaking theory had been put into this, that it leads to being a film that is structurally well put together while still being fun and rewatchably fun.
It's definitely something that you can rewatch multiple times without getting sick of it.
Yeah.
And that is demonstrated, in fact, paraded by the fact that this is a go-to Halloween movie, not just for myself, but for a lot of people. The second October rocks around, everybody's like, it's Beetlejuice time, let's go, you know?
Yeah, and what's even more amazing about this film is that it's a film that is such a well-known Halloween film, and then also such a great film that stands on its own, that it's surprising that it actually contains very little references to any other pop culture.
It really doesn't.
It stands alone in a lot of its own stuff. It doesn't really reference other films, it doesn't reference other Halloween-based films. It is self-referential, and it kind of leads on to my pointless research for this week, because the one most noticeable reference in it is actually a reference to something that didn't exist at the time.
Is this the little Jack Skellington?
Yes. So this week's pointless research, I'm talking about that in part, but I'm also actually talking about how Beetlejuice in part helped create Leika Studios.
I'm so ready for this.
So I'll start from the beginning, because ultimately I'll be talking about a lot of other films beyond this, but I wanted to start with Beetlejuice because this is the earliest it starts, and this is the earliest the references start for the viewing audience. So in this film there is a subtle reference to The Nightmare Before Christmas. When Beetlejuice rises out from the ground with a merry-go-round on his head, there is a visible skull that resembles Jack Skellington. Jack Skellington, of course, being the titular main character of The Nightmare Before Christmas. If you didn't know, which I hope you probably do. The Nightmare Before Christmas came out in 1993. Beetlejuice came out in 1988. A whole 6 years after it was referenced. And now you'd think, wait, that's interesting, because this film references something that doesn't exist yet. Not in commercial film yet, anyway. So what's interesting about this is that Tim Burton had envisioned making The Nightmare Before Christmas many years before even making Beetlejuice, because it was a concept...
because it's a stop-motion film, isn't it? So it would take a really long time to finish anyway.
No, that's not it at all.
Oh, okay.
So The Nightmare Before Christmas was a film that Tim Burton had come up with while he was in college. It was his magnum opus, his believed magnum opus of film when he was a university student, basically. So long before he even directed Beetlejuice, he was thinking of Nightmare Before Christmas.
Right.
He had concepts, early designs, and also because Tim Burton learned animation while in college as well as film. When Tim Burton was finally famous enough after making films like Beetlejuice, and was famous enough to make The Nightmare Before Christmas, he was too busy to oversee the production of a stop-motion animation because, like you said, stop-motion is going to take ages.
It is a very time-consuming process.
During the time that he wanted to make Beetlejuice, he was busy with directing Edward Scissorhands.
Another iconic movie,
Yeah, exactly. So he had to lend the reins to someone else who could oversee the direction of a stop-motion animation, which would take a very long time. So to stand in his stead, he trusted his work to Henry Selick, so a well-known stop-motion animator who Tim Burton trusted implicitly. So Henry Selick oversaw the direction of Nightmare Before Christmas, and as a result, The Nightmare Before Christmas, it is credited as Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas, not directed by Tim Burton. And it's a mistake that many people do make, but Henry Selick actually directed it. From the success of Nightmare Before Christmas, Henry Selick was then hired as a supervising director for Will Vinton Studios, which is a company that later became known as Leika Studios a year later. So as a result, without Beetlejuice, we may not have ever actually gotten animated films like Coraline and Kubo and the Two Strings. So
wow. Oh, okay. So that really is a ripple effect there.
Yeah, there is a interesting ripple effect to that. I don't think they're necessarily directly linked, and of course, if you have studied research like I have, you all know that correlation does not necessarily equal causation. But it is an interesting timeline of events that I wanted to start with here because this is the first reference in film to Jack Skellington. So
it's a pretty fun coinky-dink.
Yeah, so when we eventually get around to reviewing The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I'm not saying we'll do anytime soon, so don't predict it, but we'll talk about other things related to The Nightmare Before Christmas, because this is more related to a broader spectrum of films. Also, interestingly enough, Henry Selick is actually said to be lined up to direct the Little Nightmares TV series, and I thought you'd be interested.
Whoa. There's a Little Nightmares TV series?
There might be, in the future.
Oh, that's exciting.
But obviously we're not a gaming podcast, so we're not going to talk any further about that.
Until there's a TV series, and
Until
then it will
there's a TV
definitely
series,
be
then we
a
might
bonus
talk
episode
about
that I
if we
will
ever get around to talking about TV
Will
series.
to do with me.
Yeah, but you never know. We might do TV series at some point. But that is my pointless research tied up. Just wanted to talk about how Beetlejuice helped build up to Leika, because I thought that was quite interesting.
That is super interesting. I really like that little tidbit. I didn't realize that Leika Studios was called Leika Studios.
Yeah,
so
I'm not necessarily sure where that's from, but it's a very interesting choice because
yeah,
it's a really
you sort
nice
of wonder
name.
why Leika. It really works. It kind
Yeah.
of feels like lycanthropy in a way. Just to me personally, that's where I go with the word
there
Leika.
are a few film-based references to Leika. Leika was a camera manufacturing brand that has existed for many, many years. Yeah, Leika, the camera production company, quite well known. There's a big story about that. When we get around to Coraline, I might talk about it. We'll see. But anyway, it is interesting that Coraline and Kubo and the Two Strings, two very beautiful stop-motion animated films with very dark stories. So there is definitely a link to Tim Burton's work. So I thought it would be interesting to explore that. But with all that said, we should probably jump back to Beetlejuice as we near the end of our in-depth discussion on it.
We're just about ready to give our final thoughts, I would say.
Thereabouts. I wanted to talk more in depth about how a great deal of depth creates a greater enjoyment of a film, in that this film is set pretty much in one house, with a few additional caveats and further points, like the office and maybe the town and Jupiter.
Yeah.
In such a small space, it could create such a broad story that could exist beyond more than the sum of its parts. And I think, sure, a large part of that could be given to the fact that the house's design changes from point to point, but I also think it's because so much time and effort has been put into making every little bit of this film count.
Exactly, and the house really does look drastically different, almost to the
Yeah,
point where you don't even believe it's the same house. The layout even feels different once they've done their renovations
yeah,
to it.
absolutely.
But it really does help lean into the depth of this movie and help you feel like it's taking you places, even though it's all set in the same space. And
Yeah,
of course, we're told it's set in the same space. It's even one of the points is that when Barbara and Adam come home, they go, wow, this place gets funkier and funkier as you go through.
yeah,
Hang on, this is our house. And that really does build that sort of use of time dilation and the fact that we, as the viewers, and Barbara and Adam don't feel like they've been gone for that long, but
yeah.
truly it's been 3 living world months. So, of course, they've completely changed the house around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is really good that in a part, the pacing never feels. It's fast, but it never feels rushed. But then enough detail is provided to the meat of the story and to the visuals that we see in this story that it never feels too rushed or too slow. But it always does come across as the story jumps from point to point, but in a linear and quite seamless way.
Yeah, exactly.
So that we can believe the time jumps and the time dilation, but also the story jumps ahead quite quickly.
And I think something that really leans into this, I know we haven't talked about it much, but with the time jumps and a lot of the back and forth, because there is actually a lot of jumping from shots of one character to another in this
Yeah,
movie, it all feels incredibly natural, and that just goes to how well the cuts between camera
yeah,
angles have been handled. I don't think there's been a movie where I've seen this many camera angle changes and cuts between scenes that hasn't felt almost whiplashy in a way.
yeah. It's very fluid, and I guess the credit can go to Jane Curson, who's the editor for this film, but it is so well edited that it just flows from frame to frame.
It's so well edited that you almost forget that it is edited
Yeah,
for a moment while you're watching it.
absolutely. And it's a really nice credit to be able to give a feature-length film, is that the editing is so good that it never feels jarring to see a cut. It always flows from each cut. And
Exactly.
it was a note that I did make, I think we both made, that the cuts just seem seamless at points.
Yeah, exactly. We were very much of the same alignment on this film.
Yeah. But
We
yeah.
had pretty similar notes the entire time. I think we were both
Yeah, we were
just
very much in
enamored
the
by this
same
film.
ballpark in terms of this, in terms of what we liked about the film for sure, and
Mm-hmm.
even maybe what we didn't like. One thing I was going to say, so the film really grounds itself in a way that is quite fascinating because of course it is a supernatural film, but it maintains balance with its rules quite seamlessly. And as a result, because it follows its own rules and the rules that it establishes in this film are always followed, you never feel like, oh, that couldn't happen, that wasn't supposed to happen. And
I know,
you feel like you
definitely.
believe these points that
Yeah,
happen in the
exactly.
film.
I know in other movies we've had those sort of vibes where we've been like, hang on,
Yeah,
what the heck? Sorry, what? And then one of us will make a joke like, oh, movie magic, don't worry about it, or
yeah,
there's magic in this movie, don't worry about it, sort of
yeah,
trying to like joke that, yeah, it doesn't really make sense, but the whole world's magical, so who cares?
yeah, and
You really don't get this in this film. This
yeah,
film, even though it gives you so little about the world building and rules that it has,
yeah,
sticks to them so thoroughly that you don't really need to know the rules because you sort of, by the fact that the film adheres to them so strictly,
yeah.
subconsciously get them anyway.
Yeah, and mistakes are so much more noticeable in films that create rules and then don't follow them. But this film very strongly sets up these rules and then continues to follow them with a great strictness that is never forced upon the rest of the film. So the world building is very strict, and the rule creation and following is very, very strict. But it also allows the rest of the film to be as loosey-goosey and as free planned as possible. And as a result, the film has just such a perfect balance in that section that it just gives off this air that the film could do anything and you'd believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Almost in a way in which the film is selling itself to us, like Beetlejuice is selling himself to the Maitlands.
You get suspended between this sort of two different thoughts of the film, which is you don't really question anything that's going on because the logic is so sound and the rules are always followed, so you never have to question the rules.
Yeah.
But you also, in turn, especially with characters like Beetlejuice, who are so zany and unpredictable, are stuck in this, well, anything could happen. They could pull a giant mallet out of their pocket at any second. This is cartoon logic. You kind of get stuck between this is a very grounded place, and even though we haven't specifically been told the rules, there's definitely rules in place, to, man, this Beetlejuice guy could do anything and I would just go with it.
And it would make sense, yeah, absolutely.
And you just get stuck in this, well, what is he going to do next, Something ridiculous, I'm sure. Yeah. But it all still makes sense within the film.
Yeah, and that'll lead really nicely onto our final points. So, Monique, do you have any final points about this film? Because I feel like I've said everything I wanted to say for sure.
You've definitely talked a couple subjects to death.
Yes.
I did make that joke in the review as well, but I think it's funny, so going in again. I really, really like this, and I actually think that the sandworms specifically were quite a good use of Chekhov's gun. I am curious as to how Barbara managed to tame and ride one and get it.
What I feel is, what I believe is possibly the answer is that we're never actually given insight into what the sandworms do or what their behavior is actually like. We know that they, I guess, eat ghosts, but the ghosts don't die, as we can tell that Beetlejuice is still alive, or dead alive, at the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So it could almost be said that maybe Barbara realized that, or had come to terms with that, and chose to just aim to tame it, and as a result she did.
Yeah, rather than being terrified of it, she was like, I'm already dead, what's gonna happen, Which is super interesting. I really enjoy that the worms come up and they're this big scary thing, and then in the end they're... Yeah, exactly, and then at the very end, they're not just a throwaway joke of, if you go outside, you end up on Jupiter. They end up actually being the way that Beetlejuice is defeated in the film. And as much as the time dilation makes the film feel a little bit rushed, this film is something that came out where films in general were shorter than films today. So I can forgive the fast-paced nature because it's a 90-minute film and it really does so much with its runtime.
Yeah, but with all of that said, we will close up for this Halloween episode of Movie Magpies. We'll give you our hint. So the old hint from last week was a teenager who considers ghosting her parents finds herself at an impasse when befallen by beings that are unlike what she is used to. So hopefully you had a few guesses at that.
We did try and put the emphasis on ghosting.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's important. I think we got to give our audience a few blatant hints. I don't think that hint was very blatant, but it was definitely leaning more towards more obvious as we got closer to Halloween.
It was a bit cheeky.
Yeah, but now with the new hint, of course, as Beetlejuice is where we're leading off from, another Halloween movie where our heroes are met with ghosts and ghouls and rely heavily on a book that should never be read late at night. Hopefully, you can figure that one out.
I really, really do want to know. Please hit me up on Twitter or Instagram and let me know, have you been guessing? Have you gotten any of them right? I don't even care if you're like, yeah, I've gotten every single one right so far. I just want to know that people are like actually playing our game. I think it's so fun. I enjoy watching Will come up with the hints every week. I haven't come up with one yet. He is just much smarter than I am. But I don't know, it's fun. I really like it.
Yeah, no, it's a really fun little thing to do, and I hope you guys are enjoying it too. But with that mentioned, our socials are, if you want to reach out to us, of course, Monique is at Nexitai on both Instagram and Twitter, and I am at Greymouse Inc. on Twitter, and at Will_Mortlock on Instagram. I'm more responsive on Instagram, and Monique is more responsive on Twitter, so be sure to reach out to us. We really love hearing from you guys. And of course, be sure to follow us on Twitter, because Monique always gives out refresher hints for each episode on Thursdays. And be sure to check out my Instagram, because I'm constantly doing cinematography stuff on there, and I'm also posting highlights on my story every so often. Whenever we find something really funny to talk about, it's always up there, so be sure to check them out.
They are very fun.
But with all that said, gonna close for this Halloween episode. Have a good night, you all, and we'll see you next time.